And so now we're in Judges, and I've got a theme today that kind of goes towards and is around Judges. And as I'm looking through that, I'm really capturing a commonality. And it really, I just couldn't get away from the Old West themes. And so you're going to get a big dose of that today, all right? And maybe overboard. I hope I don't get too dad joke with it, but you're going to get a few of those in the middle of it. You know, we think about Judges from that book in the Bible of what they are. There's, you know, and nowadays we think of like, oh, the Supreme Court. And we think of people with gavels and black robes and giving judgment. And that's not what these judges were like. They weren't Judge Wapner or Judge Judy. You know, they were probably more like Judge Roy Beam. You know, they were a little bit of. They're not just giving judgments, but they were kind of bringing some law and order into it. And even more than that, they were actually more than that kind of judge. They were like rulers. They were kind of like little kingdom rulers. And we get all these short stories about them in the book of Judges. Really, really interesting book. And I'm going to break down a few of the different ones, and we're going to land on one story in particular at the end that I think brings it all together. So the title is Living with Laws with Outlaws. With Outlaws with Outlaws. So I decided which way I wanted to go, and both of them are right. You know, it is at a time where there were a bunch of outlaws running around, and they were doing it without the laws that they were supposed to have. And so there's this intensity that just surrounds what's going on in Judges. I like comparing this with this Old West theme because it has some similar qualities. If we go back and look at the Old West, the Wild West, whatever we like to call it, it really happens in a period that's actually a small period. About 1865 to the turn of the century. It's the end of the Civil War is primarily what we consider the Wild West, the Old West, until we hit the Industrial Revolution. About a 30, 35-year period is all it is. But there's a tremendous amount that comes out of it. One of the big reasons that so much information comes out of it, and I think because we have this American romance with it. I mean, it's exclusive to the United States. It happened in America. And so we have this genre of Westerns. And they happened largely because it was at a time where there were these dime store novels that were being sold all over. And these novelists were running and getting out into these areas, finding out these stories and selling this information, and people were consuming it. And it was a romance story. There were these ideas of let's take that and let's embellish it a little, let's make it a little stronger. And so people just got into it. So there's this romanticized version of what was really going on. And sometimes you couldn't tell the difference who are the heroes, who are the villains, and sometimes it depended on the writer. You've probably seen Old West movies where Billy the Kid was a hero, or Billy the Kid was a villain. Jesse James, yay. Jesse James, no. I mean, it's like, it just depended on who was writing about it. And that's kind of how it went. So you got all these things going on. You had the Civil War that kind of started all that. It was the United States embroiled in a battle, North versus South. And interestingly, we had a North versus South Civil War that happens in the Bible. And they had a difference of language and philosophy. And there was all kinds of differences that were going on. It's like, how are we going to govern ourselves? We're going to be a union or a confederacy. It was the United States. It was almost 100 years old by then. But it wasn't. United would be, it's not really. Thankfully, we're over that. We're all in agreement now. Yeah. Tongue firmly in cheek. But it led to this Civil War time. And coming out of that, it just boiled over. It kept going. And now there was this press towards the West. They had their battle, and then there was this idea of going out to the West. This is where we are in the book of Judges. Interestingly, there is a conquest of pressing west. Later, there's a battle between North and South, so they're kind of upside down from where we are, but there are some similarities that I'll show you guys. The central theme or the central verse of Judges you're going to find the very last verse in the book of Judges just kind of summarizes it. And it's this one, Judges 21:25. Judges 21:25 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes." Man, so everyone just like, okay. We've talked about this the last couple of Sundays, that there's this idea of what we believe is good and evil. Individually, in their own eyes, everyone did what they thought was right. And there was no king in those days. Never leading up to the time of kings later, which is a whole separate problem. But remember this about them trying to be a kingdom. Moses had told them a long time prior that they'd be a kingdom of priests. So it would look completely different. You're going to go into this land, it's full of kings, tribal kings from all these different regions, but don't fall into what they're doing. Follow the one true king, and that is not what they were doing. So here we are. We've got this time in the Judges, and you've got this problem coming up. And like the old dime store novels, you had different kind of outlaws. There were different, those that were sometimes romanticized as good guys, sometimes bad guys. Remember the Old West? We had all of them. We had Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. We had Billy the Kid, and of course we had Alaskan Bill White. And that's our guy here. Never mind. They all had to be named Bill, I guess. I don't know there were a lot of Bills that were actually there in. But they were not necessarily good or evil. We find the same thing when we head into Judges. So we get this central theme, and we get this collection of short stories. You get one judge after another, all the way up for about the first several chapters. It kind of recaps what happens at the end of Joshua. They talk about dividing up the land. It talks about each one of the different tribes. And they're like, yeah, they didn't get everybody out. They were given this land. They're supposed to take it. And then, well, they did, but they compromised. And then they got this land, and they were supposed to take it, but then they compromised. And then this tribe was supposed to get this land, and they went in to take it, and they compromised. And they always lived with, and every one of them had this same thing going along. Then you get to the 12 judges, and the judges, there are 12 listed in the book of Judges. Some would say 13. Amalek, he's not necessarily Abimelech. He's not necessarily a judge. He kind of calls himself that. He's kind of more like a king, ruler, authority. He's the son of Gideon, and he's not a good guy. Well, several of them are not. But he would be the 13th if you want to throw them in. My Bible, actually, the one I was using as a study Bible, had 13, and so I was looking for that division. And they included him in that lineage, but for the most part, it's 12. There are 6 major and 6 minor. That doesn't mean that some were better and some were less. Same like with the prophets. There are minor prophets and major prophets. It means there's more written about this group. So there's more written about them, so they're the 6 major. Less written about them, they're 6 minor. And by the way, there are 4 more judges that are not even mentioned in the book of Judges. It's not even meant to be an exhaustive list. It's just letting you know that this is the period that they were in. Again, some of them are regional. They're from different tribes. They have different abilities. They don't even judge the same. It's a collection of short stories that you can see. And then it ends with, and we'll land there later, this story of kind of how the debauchery from chapter 17 on is about. And here's some examples. And that's kind of what it drops to us at the end. So here are the 6 major judges. I'll give you a list of those guys, or those people. Othniel, he delivered his rights when Caleb asked for a champion. He had true grit. Left-handed judge that killed Eglon of Moab. He drove his sword into his Eglon's big fat belly and swallowed up the sword all the way to the hilt. He was the left-handed gun. That's a famous Western too. Anyway, Deborah, woman. When men did not rise up, there had to be a woman to be there. Also Jael, who drove the tent peg, took Sisera, and he's laying on the ground, and she brings him in. He's running, and he's tired, and here's some nice warm quilts. He says, can I have some water? She says, I'll do you one better. He says, a nice warm glass of milk, and he passes out. And he's evidently a heavy sleeper, And she's probably worked on the railroad, evidently, driving stakes because she's good at it. She takes a tent peg and just, wham, she nails him all the way to the ground through his head. So I don't know if she's just brutal or she hit it a lot. Anyway, she nails him literally to the ground. And there's actually an entire chapter 5. It's a song about it. You get the whole story, and then you get this song about it. And I think if you think it's so funny because they said this is the song of Deborah and Barak. And Barak, he hedged at first. He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm not going if you don't go. He's like, all right, well, then another woman's going to get glory. And it ends up being Jael. And so this song, I love the songs that are in the Bible because they're not the ones you would think. And there's this part in there like, she hammered him to the ground. It's like she smashed him, and he laid there bleeding and dying. You're like, whoa. Hey, that would have been a different worship song to sing this morning. Well, yay, jail. Anyway, so that's there. And then you go on, you've got Gideon, who is, he does some amazing things, but he begins out, he's hiding out in a wine press. The angel of the Lord comes to him and says, mighty man of valor. And I could just see him look over his shoulder like, who are you talking to, He's a little bit scared. I'm thinking shakiest gun in the West, the coward of the county. Oh, by the way, Deborah and the women, there's a old Western about the quick and the dead. It's all about these women heroes, which works because Jael's pretty quick and Sisera's pretty dead, so that worked. And so the shakiest gun, coward of the county, Gideon. I mean, those guys end up being heroes too. I love Don Knotts. He's a great guy, shakiest gun. The coward of the county, the song, how it goes. They assumed he was, but once he wasn't so much of a coward once he locked the doors. And then there's Samson. We all know about Samson. He's always, we use him a lot. He's this, big, bad, strong guy, Superman kind of guy, but he's actually a pretty rough dude biblically. He's one of the worst there really is. He had a Nazirite vow from the time he was born. It's actually kind of a forerunner image of what Christ would be, a Nazirite vow and known before he's even born. But he did not go the way of the Lord. The Lord grew in wisdom. Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, and favor. And Samson just grew in stature. And he grew up and he just kind of did his own thing. And he was always doing these riddles. I think it was really the gambler fits for Samson because he would come. I think he was just such a bad dude. And I even think with Delilah, it'd say, what can he do? I think he believed, and the reality was there really wasn't anything that they could do to stop him. Cutting his hair did not take away his strength. The Lord leaving him took away his strength. He broke his Nazirite vow over and over again. You're not supposed to touch a dead thing, much less eat honey from the carcass of a dead animal, all right? Not only did he do that, but he gave some to his parents. That's rough, y'all. I mean, I know about local honey helping with allergies and stuff, but no thank you. I'm good. I don't need no carcass honey. All right. So then there's Jephthah. Jephthah, man, this is a horrible story. He's just a kind of a local ruffian. Things get bad, and they're like, he's horrible, but he's pretty tough. So let's hire old bruiser Jephthah, and he whoops everyone. He's so happy about it. He makes a vow that, you know what, if I win this battle, I'll kill the first thing that comes out the door, and it's his daughter. And it's like, oh, well, got to do human sacrifice. God did not tell him to sacrifice his child. That was completely pagan. He's just a pagan dude, and what it just diminished into a pagan society with just Israel stature on it. So it gets bad. It spirals down, guys. It just gets from bad to worse. It started with Othniel. Caleb, they're in the land. He's like, hey, I need someone, and this is kind of what happens with David and Goliath later. Is like, I need someone to be a champion, and whoever wins can have my daughter's hand. Same thing Saul said, and David said, I'll do that. So Othniel was the guy who said, I'll do that. And he went in there, and he fought. So then it just gets worse and worse. Ehud, that one's crazy. Shoving that sword in there until the fat went around it. So the other part of that story is they're in his upper chamber. It says, and they said, let everybody go. I've got some things to tell him there. Okay. And so he kills him. He's such a big fat guy. The sword went inside his belly and stayed there. And he left him, locked the door in his upper chamber, and took off. And guards come later and like, what's going on? It's taking a long time. And they wait and they wait and they wait. And they're like, should we disturb him? The upper chamber is where he would go to relieve himself. This basically, he's locked himself in the bathroom as far as they're concerned. They're like, he's a big boy. Sometimes he takes long. And it says they waited till they were embarrassed and couldn't take it anymore. Then they just go ahead and knock the door down. And there he was. He's dead with all his bowels split on the floor. I'm like, man, what a beautiful sign. But that's the story of Ehud. And it's, all these wonderful signs. These are the judges. These are the primary judges. These are stories you get. There's a lot more to it. But you can see there is this short story kind of way about who these guys are. The last guy, Jephthah, I use the idea of unforgiven, because he gets in and just everything is just, what they're doing, it's just unforgiven. If you're familiar with the story Unforgiven, it's a Western. It's one of the most famous along the line. It won multiple Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Gene Hackman, who just recently passed, Clint Eastwood, who did most of it. Clint Eastwood's still alive. He's 187 now. He actually was alive before the Civil War. He is still alive. He's been around for a while, and he did a fantastic job on the movie. And one of the reasons it was lauded so much is because it kind of captures that whole idea of what the Old West was about. There's a dime store novelist following after a guy named Little Bill, by the way, another Bill, and trying to tell his story. And they're just a bunch of ruffians. They're embellishing all their stories. And the guy that is Clint Eastwood's character, his name is William Money, another Bill. And so they ended up at odds, and it's showing, it's kind of the anti-hero story, because it's showing that there aren't any good guys in this story. Clint Eastwood ends up being kind of the one who vindicates us at the end somewhat, but he's a terrible guy because it tells you about his past. He's a ruffian. He's a no good guy. There's a gunfight at the end where they're in a bar and they're all shooting it out, and it's not the romantic, one shot, the guy falls off the banister at the top and all of that. They're terrible. No one knows how to fight at all. They're running around. They don't know how to shoot. They don't know how to load. They're a bunch of cowards. They're drunk. It's debauchery. And it ends and they're like, okay, Unforgiven. They're like, ooh, okay. That's a little more realistic. The dime store novelist is trying to capture these stories, and it's just like, wow, okay. What he's telling us is not the way it went. So there's that feeling of this unforgiven, this nature of all this cowardice and all the problems. And the book of Judges kind of shows what happens as people are going in, they're pressing west, and they're trying to conquer their lands, and they're going in. And instead of doing what God told them to do, they start doing everything based on what they think is right and wrong. Everyone individually does what's right in their own eyes. They're like, hey, I think this is probably the best way to go, and it's bad. One thing after another. There are several scriptures that kind of also tell us about that. It's all through the Bible about people doing what's right in their own eyes. If you go back to Deuteronomy 12, Moses had already kind of basically told him this. In Deuteronomy 12, 8 and 13, I think we have scripture for that. You shall not do according to all that we're doing here today. He's looking around them. He's like, okay, guys, this is when he's kind of summing some things up. He says, we're not doing things right. Doing whatever's right, and everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. He says that specifically. A few verses later, take care that you do not offer your burnt offerings at any place you see. So when you go in, don't just do whatever you think is right in your own eyes. Don't just go in and offer wherever you see. But at the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there you'll go and offer the burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I am commanding you. There is a way that they're supposed to do things. That is not what they do. You can't just go in and say, okay, these are our rules now. You're going to go in there, it's a big land, and we're going to spread out, and people are going to go to their places that I've told you, but you need to stay central. There's got to be one place that you come back to, because I want you to be a united kingdom. That's not what they do. They go into all of their little areas. Not only do they do that, but they start taking on the people that are in those areas. If it's a Jebusite area, they're hanging out with Jebusites, Canaanites over here, Amorites, Edomites, whoever it might be, and they just go ahead and start taking on the false gods that are in all those regions. And it starts plaguing them all through. So the problems that are already in that region become the problems that they adopt. And this is kind of what's going on, and Moses is warning them ahead of time. There are several scriptures that also say this. Proverbs 14:12. There's a list of, I think, 3 I have together. Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end is death. Isaiah talks about it. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Proverbs 3:7. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil. I mean, it's said a lot. And these are just a few. Because that's what we do. We look and we go, okay, this way seems right. I got a bunch of buddies and they think this way is right. And I met this person and they've told me this. And, oh, I Googled it. Google says this. I mean, there are a plethora of opinions. And not only are we up against going into different lands and different places, but there are influences everywhere. So we need to pick our battles. Remember Joshua, last week, it's like, listen, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. You have to find out, because every one of us is worshiping something. So then we get to this story that I really want to emphasize today, and it's at the end, and it is in Judges 17. In Judges 17 and 18, actually, 2 chapters we'll look at, and I'm going to read some pieces as I go, and I'm going to summarize as we go. Have a little bit of fun with it. But Judges 17:6 is the other place within Joshua that the same verse appears that was at the end. Judges 17:6 says the same thing. So go ahead and put that one up. It is, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Sounds very, very similar because it is exactly the same. It's the same one that is the last verse to end the entire book. It is at this first part from 17 to 25, that whole last section, it doesn't have judges in it anymore. It just has these stories of what happened really bad, the debauchery that took place during that time. And the 17:18 is kind of one big story, and then you have the end of it, which is the story of Benjamin and the tribes that come after that. And probably as bad a story as any that you're ever going to see in the Bible. It is rough, rough, rough. It's all out civil war. It is just killing each other. It is one of those like, what is wrong with these people? Well, by the time they get to that, where they're in an all-out civil war with Benjamin and all the tribes against each other, they're just secular. They are completely entwined with the people that they're with, and they're not doing it based on what God is telling them anymore. They're taking some of God's information and applying it and doing it whatever they want to in their own eyes. So in 17, I'm going to back up that one is verse 6, but there's a little bit of context that leads up to that. So here we are in this period after the Judges, and now we're really going to get into our Western saga for the day. That's what this is, chapter 17 and 18. Let me give you a map to give you a little bit of context. We'll go back to the map a few times, but put the map up there, Mike, of this area. Now, this is probably going to be too far out for you to really see it well. I'll zoom in. What I want you to see, go back to the other one first, Mike, and we'll come back to the zoom in a second. All right. There is, like, right through the middle, this is, the land around Israel, and this is, as you see in the upper left there, these are the 12 tribes of Israel. As it was outlined in the book of Joshua, it's kind of where they're supposed to go. And even below Judah, which I don't even have on this map, is Simeon down there as part of with Judah. But I wanted you to be able to see most of it. Manasseh is a huge area through there. That's because Joshua was from the tribe of Manasseh, and he was the main leader. They crossed over. They crossed over down low above the Dead Sea there. You'll see it says Benjamin. They came over from about where that area where Gad is, and right across the river. I don't know if you can even see where it is. Now you can zoom in, actually. I guess I should have you zoom in at this point. Go ahead and do the next slide, Mike. So there it is. There's Jericho, and there with Benjamin, and then from Benjamin and Judah are down below, which later on that Benjamin and Judah down below is the southern kingdom, which includes Jerusalem, and it's David, and it's the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. They're all down south, and then everybody else, all the other 10 are against them in the northern kingdom. Ephraim, right above that, is very important. Ephraim is the brother of Manasseh. So Ephraim and Manasseh were the two brothers that were Joseph's sons. And so when they divided the tribes, there were two half tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so when they came across, they set up camp, and right above Ephraim right there, the dot and the I, is an area called Shiloh. And I want you to pay attention to that later, not just because it's kind of a cool Western name, but because we'll talk about it again in a little bit. And then next to that, on the far west, the most Western, is Dan. And we're going to get into Dan a lot in chapter 18. I'm going to tell you about what's going on in that region. We'll revisit this. But I want you to get a feel for what was supposed to be and where they were at the time. So, Judges 17, 1 and 2, the very beginning of 17 says this. There was a man of the hill country, he was from around here, the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse over and spoke it in my ears. I actually heard you say this. Behold, the silver is with me. That's because I took it. So what had happened, this guy Micah, and remember this is a cowboy story, and there's not an Old West cowboy named Micah, but there's a Dallas cowboy named Micah, so we got that. So Micah, the cowboy, he has a mother. He's in the tribe of Ephraim, the last thing I showed you up there, and his mom had this silver. They're a pretty wealthy family, and so they've got this silver, and someone took it. So remember that silver that was taken? It was me. And the reason he told her, part of that we know, is he said, you were speaking curses over it. It seems like she was probably somewhat of doing a divining, and maybe she's just a straight up witch. I don't know, but she spoke curses over the silver. Whoever had it, he thought, well, I better give it back to mom. I don't want that. And so he gives it back, and then her reaction, she's like, awesome. I'm glad we still have it. Here's what we're going to do. You have this shrine you've been worshiping at. I'm going to give you a bunch of this silver, and we're going to take it. We're going to take it to the smelter, and we're going to have him melt that thing down, and we're going to make an image out of it, and we're going to worship that. So they take this silver that he had taken for himself, and they take it to a man with a big kettle that they can cook it down. So now we got a couple more things that we can remember about this story. These are ways you'll remember this. In Greek, the word for self is auto, which we get the words A-U-T-O, literally. Auto. So auto, like it's automatic, it's self-driving. So we use auto a lot. So auto is that ending. And we know that he took the silver for himself. So this is Silverado, okay? So, all right. I had to think hard on that one. So Micah the cowboy stole the silver himself, Silverado, and his ma had it cooked down in a kettle. So she's Ma Kettle. All right. It may get worse, I thought you, but you remember it. So this is kind of how the story starts, all right? And they're in the mountains. He's kind of like a Jeremiah Johnson kind of character, evidently, up in the mountains. And then we go on, and they've come to a place where they're really godless. I mean, where did they get to? And this is that she believes this is the thing to do. And we find out later that the image they make is just another Baal, another cow. I mean, I know we're talking about cowboys, but come on. I mean, they got this thing with cows, and so they make another one of those, and this that they're doing right now lasts for a tremendous amount of time. This is a kind of a small story, but it has massive long-term implications, as I'll show you in a little bit. So Micah Parsons of the Dallas Cowboys and Ma Kettle Silveradoed, and then let's get to 17:5. Let me read this next thing. Judges 17:5. The man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods and ordained one of his sons who became his priest. He's like, all right, we're set up now. But I need an ephod. They already knew about that. Not only did they took this idea of this calf, which was a golden calf, they made a silver one, which they should have known at least that's a bad idea. But they all did also know about the ephod. They said, what if we made an ephod where we could have priestly garments? It's okay, cool. But we don't have a priest. What should we do? Said, well, little Johnny likes to dress up. Let's make him a priest. And so they're going to make one of the sons a priest. And this is their plan, because this is what they have. They're doing what's right in their own eyes. They've really come off the rails. So they put all this together at this point. Now we encounter a new person, and we get Judges 17:7. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he journeyed there. So I showed you on the map a little bit earlier, right above Benjamin is Ephraim. This is where they were, and down below is Judah. So down below is Judah. He's coming up from down below. He's a Levite. Now remember, the Levites don't have land, so they're all over the place. So he's of the tribe of Levi, which is supposed to be the priestly order. So he's wandered up through Benjamin into, now he's up in this area of Ephraim. And so he's up in there, in this region, and he's gone up to find a place, to find a new place. He's wandering alone. We know this guy is out there wandering alone. He's kind of a high plains drifter, you know, and because actually Ephraim is this mountainous region. But if you go to like Shiloh, that area is a big, huge, flat plain. It's actually where they end up setting up the tabernacle. They had to have and it really literally was a high plains. And he was this somewhat of a preacher. He was actually a loner out there, a stranger wandering. He was a lone stranger. So that's even worse. And I looked this up. I had to know. There's an old Far Side cartoon, thinking of the Lone Ranger. There's an old Far Side cartoon where he's old age and he's sitting in his rocking chair and he's reading this book, and it says Indian translations. And underneath it says, late in his life, the Lone Ranger made a startling observation. He's reading it, and it says, Chemo Savi means horse's rear end. I thought that was pretty funny. So I thought, I'm going to look it up and see if chemo and Savi actually are words in Hebrew. And they are, which is kind of fun. And especially what they mean. Because chemo is a word that means to appear. If something's chemo, it has the appearance of, or the sameness of. It's the likeness of. And Save means to be bloated. So he appeared bloated. I guess that's that one. But it's worse. Tonto is also a word. Tonto means idiot. I was like, wow, that's terrible. These guys did not like each other. And the reality is that I don't think they were Jewish, so we're probably okay. All right. So then, I think I went too far here. So we got these two guys. Yes, all right. And go to Judges 17:11 now. Judges 17:11, the story continues. They're out there. He's wandering. He shows up in 17:11. The Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So the Levite's going through, and Micah says, hey, why don't you hang out with us? We could use a real priest. We already have the outfit. And you know what? I'll pay you. And he's like, I like payment. That sounds good. It's like, I'm a wealthy guy. You can be our priest. And he's like, this is what a gig. I think I'll do that. So basically, he goes from being this lone stranger, the high plains drifter. Now he's just a gun for hire. Really, he just is. And he does it because he does it just because he wants a fistful of dollars. And now he's treated like a son, the son of Micah, his elder. There's a famous movie called The Sons of Katie Elder, so this is a stretch. All right, anyway. All right, so now we move into, this goes now basically into Judges 18, and this is when Dan gets introduced. And the tribe of Dan gets introduced in 18:1, and we find this. In those days, there was no king. We get that a lot. Doesn't go ahead and say they did what was right in their own eyes, but we get that part again. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan, which was out there in the far west, was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So it hadn't fallen to them because they went into that area, that far west area, and just below where they were was the whole area of the Philistines. Now, they drove out giants all through that hill country when they first got there. Joshua and they went in and they took them out. And that was where the Anakim were. But below that, you had the Philistines. They had more giants, all the giants of Gath. And that was the area they were having to go into. And said, hey, congratulations, you guys get this area. So they went in there and they weren't doing so well. So now they're in this wandering period and they're like, we don't like it out west. This is pretty rough. And so it's not going well for us. And so they feel like they've kind of got to get out of that area. So there's no other tribe other than Dan. They're out there seeking a place to go. In fact, because they're seeking, I thought if John Wayne saw them, he'd probably just call them pilgrims, right? This is kind of be what they would be called. Or even better, they were searchers, all right? They were the searchers. They're actually looking for a new land. If there had been 7 of them, it would have been awesome because they could have been the magnificent 7. But there were only 5. There were only 5. They came from the west. There is a famous Western called 5 Guns West. So these are the 5 Guns West boys, the searchers, all right? So they're coming up, and they come out of the west, and they go through Ephraim first on their track, and they're like, hey, we're looking for, what are you guys doing? Like, we're got to go find us a new place. And so he treats the guys nice, invites them in, these 5 guys, and they see this young Levite, and they're like, they recognize him. And we don't know whether they know the guy. It kind of seems like maybe they know him personally, or at least he was obvious as a Levite. It was like, oh, he's got an accent, or he's wearing the outfit. We're not sure why, but they said they recognize him. Most likely they just knew who he was. And they're like, what are you doing here, man? And he's like, hey, I found a great gig. They got all this stuff. They're paying me. This is a really cool deal. And they're like, wow, that's cool. I said, so could you drum up some info for us and let us know how our journey's going to go? And he said, yes. And so he asked the Lord, he said, you know what? He says, you're good, guys. All right. So they head on their way with their newfound information. And so they head now toward the north. So show the map again. This map is, if you see it from the below, they're down there in Ephraim. That dark green to the far left, I don't know if you can quite read it, is where they were, Dan. And then they head out and they're going north. So I think I got a little bit of a zoom in. Is there one more map on there? Yeah. So now you barely see Ephraim and Dan at the far bottom. And now look at the very, very, very top. On the far right, the orange, it says Dan. All right? So there's a place called Dan up there, but there's Dan down there. Well, that's where they didn't settle. What they did instead was they head up the river, and they go all the way up north, as far north as they could go. They cross over to the other side, and they find this big, huge, beautiful land. And they go, this is our place, and this is where our story goes. So they couldn't figure out how the west could be won. So they decided they were going to go up north, way up north. And the area up north, if you see out to the side, it's an area of the Sidonians. And we're told that this area is with Sidonians. So they go north to Sidonia, way up north. So it's not Alaska. It's okay. I know. It's running thin now, isn't it? Okay. So they head up there, and they're going to go look for a place. So Judges 18:7 now. Judges 18:7 and 9 tells us this. The 5 men departed, and they came to Laish, and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet, unsuspecting, lacking nothing that's in the earth, possessing wealth. They were far from the Sidonians because they were on the coast, there was a ways off, and had no dealings with anyone. So they weren't as close to their folks as they should be. And then they came to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtel. They're like, okay, we're going to talk to these guys. And they said to them, what's your report? And they said, man, arise, let's go against them. We've seen the land, and behold, it's very good. Like, this is our place, guys. So what we've been looking for. It's a beautiful thing. And this is what they say. They go, we've got these people that are there, but they are not near the people they need to be with. They are far and away. That's another one. Anyway, and it is easy pickings for us because this area is open range. All right? That's one of my favorites, by the way. I like that one. It's land spreading out so far and wide. They can keep Manhattan. Just give us a countryside. Oh, they weren't coming from Manhattan. But anyway, all of that was going on. So in 11 through 13, if you read on, I'm not going to read it up here, but they go back and they load up everything they have for war. They load it all up and they're ready to go. So basically, they're just loading up the war wagon to head back up north to take what they have. That's another one, war wagon. Okay, never mind. So they go back through. They end up back at Micah's house. They go back to the guys down with Dan, the tribes are, and they're going to go back to the north. And it's like, this is what we want. And so they go down to Micah. On the way, just pretty quickly, they go back through Micah's place. And they said, the 5 guys said, hey, by the way, and now there are 600 of them. When we went through here before, there's a Levite priest here. And he gave us a good report, and it worked out. So I think we should swing by there and see if he wants to go with us. So they go by, and they talk to the Levite, and they said, hey, you going to go with us? He's like, why would I leave here? I got a fistful of dollars. And they said, you know what? How about a few dollars more? And he says, yay, because he's a gun for hire. So he leaves Micah Parsons and Ma Kettle, and he's ready to roll. He's like, okay, out of here, man. I got a better gig. Let's move on. And so what do? They also grab all the silver, and they load it up on their war wagon, and they're ready to take it off, and they're going to head out of there. And I just imagine as they're leaving, they say, hi-ho, silver. So, away. No? Okay. That's all right. Too much. And so they head out. And so they're heading off now. They've got the silver. And the tribe of Dan and his neighbors and his buddies back home, they're like, hey, where'd the priests go? Wait, where's our stuff? So they form a posse. And they're going to head out, and they're going to cut Dan off at the pass. And that's where we pick up our story, Judges 18. So Judges 18, and this is a bigger chunk here, but it says this in 22. The people from the tribe of Dan were quite a distance from Micah's house. The people who lived near Micah came chasing after them. They were shouting as they caught up with them. The men of Dan turned and said to Micah, what's the matter? Why have you called these men together and chased after us like this? What do you mean, what's the matter? Micah replied. You've taken away all the gods I have and I made and my priests, and I have nothing left. So they catch up to him, and they're bemoaning. What do you mean? Look at what you've done. And it continues on. Go on to the next slide there. The men of Dan said, watch what you say. You better watch your mouth, boy. There's some short-tempered men around here who might get angry and kill you and your family. Tell you right now, there won't be nothing left of you guys but a bunch of tombstones. So the men of Dan continued on their way. Micah saw that there were too much. There were too many of them for him to go back and attack. He turned around and went home. I think when they caught up to him out there on the trail, it doesn't say in the Bible, but it had to be high noon, right? It had to be, right? I think it was. Yeah, and then also they're out there and came up to them, and you know what's the first thing the guys said? They were like, don't be trying to corral us. It's not okay to corral us, I'm telling you. And I think as they were riding off, because they had 600 of them, they were all watching them ride off. They'd all hi-ho silver and took off already. I think in the distance you could hear the tribe, the Micah guys just yelling at them, shame! So bad. Judges 18. All right, Judges 18, 27 and 28. Then with Micah's idols and the priests and the men of Dan came to the town of Laish, whose people were peaceful and secure. They attacked them with swords and burnt the town to the ground. Now that's a Western right there. These are not good guys. There was no one to rescue the people, for they lived at a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. This happened in the valley near Beth Rehob. It means open space, and it's just like we said before. It was open range. It was exactly what we said. It was a big valley. It was all of that, but now they had turned it into Death Valley. So there it was. There was no good or evil. There was good and evil, but they're in their own eyes doing their own thing. At the culmination of this, they just go in there and this is not by the command of the Lord. They just looked out until they found a nice place to settle. And they burn it they were peaceful, unsuspecting people, and they just killed them all and took their place. Like, hey, this is good land. They were doing it the way they wanted to. They exacted their own vengeance. They were stealing each other. They're stealing priests from each other. They stole worship images from each other. I mean, it was bad that they even had them to begin with, and they took them from each other. Remember what Moses had warned them. He said, there will be one place that you go and set up, and you go there to worship. And they did all of this. They were wheels off. They were out of it. They took and they killed all the people there, and there becomes a huge, lasting problem. And the wind-up of this thing, if we go back to the map, look at this. I'll show you something. I mentioned it before, but this is Shiloh. So Shiloh, right above the dot in the eye of Ephraim, Shiloh is when they came across, they said, okay, they took the tabernacle, and Joshua said, this is the place. They went to this high plains area, on the flat area on top of the mountain, still there to this day. There's still a town there. They set up and had the tabernacle there at Shiloh. And that was supposed to be the place that they went back to for worship. And for 400 years, almost 400 years, 396, the tabernacle was there. And even in the midst of all of this, they obviously were not continuing to do what they were supposed to. They were not coming back, and they just decided they would go their own way, do their own thing. They said, you know what, we could stay at home and make this happen where we are instead of coming back together. And they lost the community of what God had told them to do because they were doing things that were right in their own eyes. So they end up with all of these different ideas. They end up with regional, they're really just like regional kings, just like everybody else. And they went that way. And what was supposed to be where God would be was abandoned. And then the Philistines ultimately come out from further west over there, down far southwest. They come up and they burned Shiloh to the ground. They took the Ark of the Covenant and they went and kept it. That's the thing that David had to ultimately go and take back from them, is because they took it. They burned Shiloh to the ground. So once they reset up the kingdom, they couldn't even go back to where it was. They rebuilt a town there later on, but it wasn't the same one. So David said, hey, let's take it to Jerusalem when he took it back. And that's how you end up with it there in Jerusalem for a while. They end up taking it there and ultimately build the tabernacle, which Solomon builds after him. So there's this long implication of what happens. Let me read to you this final part of what happens there in Shiloh, the mention in Joshua 18 as it closes. They did not all take their, I don't actually have it as a verse. I just put it down as information. I'm sorry. They did not all take their inheritance. So they went to the tabernacle on the hill of Ephraim, and it was there for 400 years. And then again, the very last thing that it says is that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That there at Shiloh, it was supposed to stay. I did have that. That was the one I read before. So go back to 1830. If you have that one, Mike, Judges 18:30 to 31. It's at the end of that one. We just went through it. So they set up Micah's, I'll just read the whole thing. And the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. So the house of God was there at Shiloh. They took those images that they took from Micah. Those became an actual worship center in the far north because they felt like they were too far away from Shiloh. So they kind of went and did their own thing. They kind of set up their own priesthood. And they're not even Levitical priests. They were from the tribe of Moses. Others said they were from the tribe of Manasseh. But they were not Levitical priests. They continued this facade for many years. Said they kept it there in Dan as long as the tabernacle was at Shiloh. So for 400 years, they're up there with this false god that they're worshiping, false Levitical priesthood. And then when the kingdoms divide later on, they come back down to Jerusalem. They sit up there and they bring their worship down back into the area of Bethel, which is just below where you see it says Ephraim. There's Bethel. So the northern kingdom is mainly worshiping at two places, at Bethel and at Dan, the northern Dan, whereas the southern kingdom is there at Jerusalem. Later on, Jesus shows up on the scene. One of the things that he does, he's like, I must go through Samaria. That's right there above, that area of Ephraim. That's what becomes Samaria, because the whole northern kingdom all the way up, the 10 tribes, that's all part of Samaria, whereas the lower tribes, what's Israel becomes Samaria, and what the lower tribes are, Judah, is where David is. So there are massive long-term implications. And ultimately, by the time that Jesus shows up on the scene, just those that have just willingly just inbred with everyone else and taken it all into them, had the half-breeds, is the way they would say it, were these Samaritans. And it was a problem that they detested each other by the time of Jesus. So when Jesus goes into there and ministers to them, talking to a Samaritan woman, he's not even supposed to talk to a woman, much less a Samaritan. All those implications were set up, and you could see the ramifications that went way back to this story. That doesn't seem like much back in the Old West, but it meant a lot. The thing is, when we start doing things that we think are right in our own eyes, there are implications for it. Sometimes long-term consequences for the stuff that we do. But God has a plan that's so much better. Now, His Word directs us quite a bit. But the other thing we must always do is go to Him in prayer. Really, to say, does this jive with what God's Word says? Because when Jesus said, when He left, He would send a helper, a Holy Spirit, one that would let us know the things that we should do, it wasn't just a suggestion. It was a way that we communicate with God. And that way today looks like prayer. So we go to Him not with just request, but we then listen. What should I do in this situation? And those answers are not always the same. They're not formulas for those things. Formulas are not relationships. You don't find out, I don't ask Charla what she wants to eat 3 times and then say, okay, now I understand everything that you'll ever want to eat because I've asked you 3 times. I heard that. You heard that guy who was talking to his wife, and his wife said, "Why don't you ever say you love me?" And he said, "Oh, I told you I loved you when we got married. If I ever change my mind, I'll let you know." That's not a good way to go. We really should keep reminding it. We should have conversation. We should do better than that. So let's converse with the Lord too. Amen. All right. Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you that you are the God who's bigger than anything that we can imagine. You come into the middle of our hot mess wherever we've lived, whether it's in the Old West or in the time of Judges or in this world that's not united even where we live now, where there are blue states and red states and blue people and red people, and God, that you're your people. And that doesn't mean that anyone is qualified or disqualified by our patterns or beliefs, but Lord, there's one truth behind all things, and that's what we seek. So, Lord, let us not lean on our own understanding and follow our own ways and our own eyes, but instead understand that you are the way, the truth, and the life. And there is no way to eternity, to life, but by you, through Jesus Christ. Thank you that you are our Lord. We give you this day.